My life had always felt steady and predictable, like a song that had been played over and over again. Every morning I woke up to the sounds of the house coming alive, brewed coffee for myself and for Daniel, my husband, who was always out the door early for work. Our conversations had become brief and robotic, like something from an old family routine. Daniel was a good man, reliable, responsible, and often a bit too predictable. Then one day, after he canceled our weekend plans again because of an urgent work issue, I decided to leave the house and take a walk around our quiet town to clear my mind. I strolled down the streets, breathing in the cool morning air, when I suddenly spotted Ethan, an old friend of Daniel, standing at the entrance of a wine shop. He waved and walked over with a wide grin, and I felt a little tightness in my chest. Ethan had always struck me as a bit mysterious. His broad smile and his mannerisms always seemed to carry some hidden meaning. We'd crossed paths a few times at parties, but we never really talked. "Sophia." "Hey," he called, his voice louder than I'd expected. "Are you on your own?" he asked. "Hey, Ethan." "Yeah, just decided to go for a walk," I answered, trying to keep my tone light. He smiled again and suggested we grab a coffee at a small cafe across the street. I wasn't sure if I should say yes, but there was something in his eyes that caught my interest. It felt almost like an invitation to something new, like a challenge. "Why not?" thought and agreed. We sat at a small table in the corner and talked about nothing too personal, just safe, neutral topics. He asked about my hobbies, seemed genuinely curious about my plans, and suddenly I realized the conversation was taking a turn I hadn't expected. Ethan was unexpectedly attentive, and his interest in my life felt real. It was a pleasant surprise. For the first time in ages, I felt like someone was truly seeing me, not just as Daniel's wife. Then, at one point, he complimented my smile. "Have you ever noticed how much it changes when you laugh?" he asked, looking straight into my eyes. I felt a bit flustered and leaned back in my chair, unsure of how to respond. We kept talking, but now there was a subtle shift in the tone, something more personal, more intimate. As the conversation continued, I became more aware that this moment with Ethan in the cafe was stirring up an unfamiliar feeling in me. It was a mix of excitement and a little embarrassment. At one point, he took my hand and, almost playfully, brought it to his lips for a kiss. It was brief and simple, just a light kiss on the back of my hand. But the way he did it, gently with such care, made it feel significant, as though he was handling something precious. And though I immediately pulled my hand away, that small gesture stirred something deep inside me. It felt like there was more hidden in that moment than just a friendly gesture. I didn't fully understand what had happened, but that day stuck with me as a turning point, a moment when something in my life began to shift. On the walk home, I could still feel the faint trace of his touch on my skin, and found myself thinking about Ethan far more than I probably should have. Days passed, but thoughts of him lingered. His unexpected kiss, his sincere gaze, his smile full of meaning. It all replayed in my mind like a line from a play I couldn't stop thinking about. I tried to push him out of my mind, but somehow I kept running into him. We'd bump into each other in town or exchange short texts. "How's your day?" or "Want to grab a coffee?" Simple messages, but each time they seemed to carry more weight. I could feel the tension building between us, unspoken but real. Then, one sunny afternoon, when Daniel was working late, Ethan suggested we meet at the park. I hesitated for a long time before deciding, driven by curiosity and a growing need to figure out what was happening between us. The park was quiet and nearly empty when I arrived. I felt an unusual sense of anticipation, like something important was about to unfold. As Ethan approached, I immediately sensed this encounter would be different from the others. He seemed more serious than usual. The easy smile that normally lit up his face had faded, replaced by a subtle hint of concern. We walked along the path, making small talk, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I was trying to understand what it was about him that drew me in. His confidence? His ability to listen? Or was it something else that I couldn't quite pinpoint? "You know, Sophia," he said, suddenly stopping. "You've always been a bit of a mystery to me, so open but at the same time so closed off. It's like there's something inside you that you don't want anyone to see." I smiled, trying to brush off his words, but he pressed on. "Sorry if this sounds odd," he added, "but I feel like I know you better than most." His voice was low, but there was something in it that made me stop and meet his gaze. At that moment, I felt a tension between us that was almost tangible. "Really?" I asked with a half-smile, though inside my heart was racing. You hardly know me, Ethan. He didn't respond. Instead, he stepped closer and suddenly I felt his hand on my cheek. His fingers gently grazed my skin, and I saw the intensity in his eyes, as though he were searching for something deeper within me. Before I could react or pull away, he leaned in and kissed me. This kiss wasn't like the first one, quick and light. It was deep, full of emotion, and left me with a sensation I couldn't quite name. In that moment, everything around us seemed to freeze. Time slowed, and all I could feel were his soft, warm lips. I had no idea how long it lasted, seconds or maybe longer. But I realized that I didn't want to pull away. Still, something inside me, fear or maybe common sense, urged me to push him away. I took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. Ethan, I whispered, trying to regain control. This is wrong. He stepped back too, his gaze momentarily shifting, though I could see the mix of regret and determination in his eyes. I'm sorry, Sophia, he said softly. I didn't mean for it to happen. I just couldn't help myself. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, contradictions, and emotions. I knew that moment had changed everything between us, but I wasn't sure what it meant yet. As we parted ways, I could still feel the lingering sensation of his kiss on my lips. And even though I wanted to forget it, I knew it was impossible. Something had sparked inside me, something that wouldn't let me rest. A burning curiosity about Ethan, and an attraction that I couldn't control. Days passed in a haze of confusion. Every morning, I woke up with an unsettling sense of anxiety I couldn't shake. Each time I looked at Daniel across the breakfast table, my chest tightened. He had no idea, continuing on with his work and daily routine, unaware of the shift inside me. But for me, everything had changed. The moments I'd spent with Ethan in the park haunted me. His touch, his kiss, the way he looked at me. All of it was seared into my memory. I tried to convince myself it was just a mistake, a fleeting moment of foolishness that would fade away. I even tried to avoid him, ignoring his messages, but it felt almost impossible. He kept reaching out as if nothing had happened. Every text, every message seemed to carry a deeper meaning, like he understood me in ways I didn't understand myself. And then one evening when Daniel invited Ethan over for dinner, I couldn't hide the way I felt. A wave of heat rushed through me, and I could feel the tension building with every movement Ethan made. He arrived as usual, his easy smile in place, but there was something different about his gaze. It was more intense, more focused. Daniel suggested we have a glass of wine, and I agreed, hoping the alcohol would ease the growing tension. We sat at the table trying to keep the conversation light, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan was studying me, watching my every move. His stare was sharp, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. When Daniel excused himself to grab another bottle of wine, the air between Ethan and me thickened with unspoken words. Sophia, he said quietly, moving closer to me. I need to talk to you. Please don't, I responded, my voice barely a whisper as I tried to keep it steady. We can't. It was all a mistake. He nodded, but his eyes held something that made me freeze. He took a step closer, then another, and I felt his hand gently touch mine. His fingers closed around my palm, warm against my skin, and despite every warning in my mind, I couldn't pull away. My body betrayed me, unable to resist the pull between us. Sophia, he whispered, I can't just let this go. You mean so much to me. His words struck deep, breaking down all the walls I tried to build between us. His hand brushed my cheek, sending a shiver down my spine. And then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed me again. This kiss was different, more urgent, more desperate. There was nothing innocent about it. It was filled with a passion and longing I hadn't realized was there before. His lips met mine gently but firmly, and for a moment I let myself forget everything, the consequences, Daniel, what was right and wrong. A wave of emotion flooded over me. I felt more alive than I had in ages, as if something inside me that had been dormant for too long had awakened. But then, as if a cold wind had pierced through the warmth of the moment, I remembered where we were and quickly pulled away. I stepped back, my heart hammering in my chest. My cheeks were flushed, and my breath came in ragged gasps. This can't continue, I said softly, almost trying to convince myself more than him. I know, he replied, his voice thick with emotion, but there was still a fire in his eyes. But I can't just walk away from this. At that moment, Daniel came back into the room with the wine glasses. I forced myself to act like nothing had happened, but the tension between Ethan and me hung in the air, thick and undeniable. I knew this kiss had changed everything. Something in my life had cracked open, and there was no going back to the way things were. It was clear now that the game had only just begun, and I had to make a choice, one that would change everything. I tried to get back to normal after that evening, but my mind was consumed by thoughts of Ethan. His words, his touch, his gaze. All of it had sunk deep into my consciousness, like a dangerous spark in the middle of a dry forest. I tried to focus on the mundane. Taking care of the house, chatting with Daniel, but each time he touched me it felt wrong. I couldn't look at him the same way anymore. The same question kept echoing in my mind. What am I doing? What is happening to me? But no answers came. Ethan didn't reach out for several days, and I couldn't decide if I felt relieved or anxious. Something had shifted, and whatever that was, it wouldn't let me go. I knew our secret meetings were becoming a dangerous game, and I started to fear the consequences. The ones that could destroy everything I'd built with Daniel. But deep down I couldn't shake that strange feeling, the pull of attraction that seemed to draw me to him like a magnet. I found myself living every minute caught in this contradiction. Then one evening when Daniel was working late, my phone rang. It was Ethan, his name flashing on the screen. My heart skipped a beat. He asked if I could meet him again just for a few minutes so he could explain himself. I knew it was the wrong decision, but the overwhelming need to understand what was happening took over. I agreed. We met at a small cafe on the edge of town, a place usually quiet with few customers. The air felt heavy, like something important and unresolved was hanging between us. I noticed that Ethan looked different. His face serious, a shadow in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "Thanks for meeting me, Sophia," he said cautiously, glancing around. "I need to tell you something." I sat down across from him, trying to appear composed, though everything inside me was in turmoil. "What happened, Ethan? Why are we here?" I asked, trying to keep the edge of anxiety from my voice. He paused for a moment, carefully choosing his words before speaking. "I think you should know the truth. You might not realize this, but Daniel, he knows about our meetings. Someone told him." The words hit me like a lightning strike. My mind went blank for a moment. Who? How? When? Why hasn't Daniel said anything to me? Panic surged inside me. Who told him? And how do you know? My voice was shaking now. Ethan frowned and continued. "Daniel and I have had our disagreements in the past. Maybe he thought this could ruin things between you two. I don't know all the details, but I feel like he knows more than he's letting on." I couldn't process what he was saying. Daniel hadn't said a word to me. No hints, no questions, not even a trace of suspicion. My mind was racing. Why had he stayed silent? Was he waiting for the right moment? And why was Ethan telling me this now? What did it mean? I asked quietly, trying to make sense of it all. "What now?" Ethan tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know, but I feel like this could destroy everything, your marriage, your family. You need to be careful, Sophia. We need to figure out what to do next." His words felt like a warning, but there was something else behind them. Something more hidden. A subtle threat I couldn't ignore. I felt my insides tighten. I started to wonder if Ethan had his own agenda. Maybe he wasn't as transparent as I had believed. He knew too much, and his words about Daniel's suspicions only deepened my fears. "What are you really trying to say, Ethan? Why are you telling me this now?" There was a cold edge in my voice as I confronted him. He smiled, but it wasn't the friendly smile I was used to. It was twisted, almost cruel. "I just want you to know what you're up against, Sophia," he said, "so you can make an informed decision. Understand what's going on." I looked at him, feeling unease grow inside me. I was beginning to realize that this situation was far more complicated than I had imagined. Was Ethan genuinely trying to protect me? Or was this some twisted game he was playing? One thing was certain, I couldn't trust him, not completely. And I didn't know who or what I could trust anymore. I stood up, overwhelmed by the weight of the conversation. I needed time to think, to process my emotions, to figure out what to do next. I glanced at Ethan one last time. His eyes still filled with that mixture of regret and determination. I understood then that our conversation in this cafe had changed everything. I didn't know who I could trust anymore or what was coming next. Days passed and my anxiety only grew. It felt like I was walking a tightrope, each step more precarious than the last. Ethan's words played on a loop in my head, but I still couldn't figure out his true intentions. Was he truly worried about me, or was this his way of manipulating me, playing on my fears? Daniel showed no signs of suspicion, and that only made me more uneasy. I felt trapped, isolated behind walls I couldn't see, let alone tear down. One evening, when Daniel and I were having dinner at our favorite restaurant, I realized that he hadn't invited me there by chance. He knew I loved this place for its quiet, cozy atmosphere. We talked about small things, work, the weather, weekend plans, but there was an edge to his voice, a coldness I hadn't noticed before. It became clear to me that he had chosen this moment for a reason. He was staring at me, as if he wanted to say something important but was unsure how to begin. "Sophia," he finally said, setting down his fork and looking at me seriously. "We need to talk." My heart stopped. I already knew what he was about to say, but a small part of me still clung to hope that it wasn't what I feared. "Yes, of course, Daniel. What's wrong?" I tried to sound calm, though I could feel my hands trembling. He paused for a long moment, gathering his thoughts, then finally spoke. "I know about you and Ethan," he said quietly, his voice void of anger, only cold determination. "I've been told you've been seeing him often." His words struck me like a physical blow. I felt the world tilt, everything going blurry. For a moment I forgot to breathe. He knew. All this time he had known. But why hadn't he said anything? What was he waiting for? And who told him? "Daniel, it's not what you think." I began trying to explain, but he cut me off with a raised hand. "Don't," he said. "Sophia, I already know everything. I thought I could just ignore it, hoping you'd stop. But now I see that was a mistake. You're not the person I thought you were." His words cut through me like a knife. I wanted to explain, to tell him it wasn't what it seemed, but I could feel it. He had already made his decision. "Who told you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoping at least that would give me some answers. Daniel looked down at his plate, weighing his words. After a long moment he finally met my gaze. "Ethan," he said. "He came to me. Told me something was going on between you two. Maybe he wanted to hurt me. Maybe he had his reasons. But he did it. And now, I can't just let it go." A cold sweat broke out across my forehead. Ethan. The same Ethan who had assured me that Daniel suspected nothing. He was the one who had told Daniel everything. I suddenly understood. This whole thing had been part of his plan, a game all along. Maybe it was revenge against Daniel, or maybe just an attempt to tear my life apart. But at this point it didn't matter. "Daniel, I tried to speak, but the words failed me. You know, Sophia," he interrupted with a sad smile, "the worst part isn't what you did. It's that you let yourself play this game. I can't trust you anymore. And I'm not sure I ever will." He stood up from the table, leaving me alone, shattered and disoriented. My life was falling apart in front of me, and I had no idea how to stop it. "I'm filing for divorce, Sophia," he said with cold finality. "I need you to move out. That's all I have to say." He walked away, leaving me alone in the dimly lit restaurant, staring after him. Everything around me seemed to lose its meaning. The world felt empty, pointless. Ethan, the one I had once considered a friend, maybe even something more, had betrayed me. He had destroyed my life for reasons I couldn't even begin to understand. And now I was left with nothing. No husband. No home. No respect. I walked out of the restaurant, not knowing where to go. All I could do was realize that every step I had taken had led me here. Past the point of no return, into a darkness no one could pull me from.